Ivan Toney has been given an 8-month suspension from football, and he's fined £50,000 by the FA for 232 breaches of its betting rules. Now, he's been warned, this is a Brentford striker, of course, he's been warned about his future conduct after admitting 232 of the 262 breaches with which he was charged in December. One key question comes out of this. Many questions come out of it, but I think this is key, Simon. With 3 months of the 8 in the close season, is this a statement punishment from the FA, or does it fall short? Now, I'll return to that in a second. The rules are very straightforward in this. FA rules, E8. A participant shall not bet, either directly or indirectly, or instruct, permit, cause, or enable any person to bet on the result, progress, conduct, or any aspect of, or occurrence in, or in connection with a football match or competition. Now, so much so, the FA have been at pains to point this out. And this, Simon, is front and centre on their website. It couldn't be more clear, could it? If you're watching on YouTube or Facebook this morning, you'll see it. All bets are off. You are not allowed to place any bet on any football anywhere in the world. So it's simple, isn't it? So then we go back to Toney, who is, of course, a participant. And I'll ask it again, Simon, with 3 months of the 8 in the close season, what kind of punishment is this? Does it fall short?
Well, it depends what the sentencing guidelines are, doesn't it? If the maximum amount of penalty can be a certain amount of time, then we have to understand that that's the principle. Look, he has been sanctioned for 8 months. 3 months are, as you quite rightly say, during a predominant part of the post-season. And then you've got 5 months, or 4.5 months, or best part of it, 4.5 months, where he can't play competitive football. So half the season next year, a key critical time for both Brentford and for Ivan Toney. So if we assume, I mean, he couldn't have gotten himself into this situation at a worse time, optically, with the way that the football world is being forced to look at betting and the pressure that's coming down on it with the decisions to remove sponsorship from shirt sponsors because of the pressure being built around the betting industry and it's the adverse side of it. So all of that forms a landscape that puts Ivan Toney right in the eye of a whirlwind. Right? Now, if we're suggesting that, I mean, Oliver Holt in the Mail has written a column saying that actually he thinks it's way too harsh and thinks it's beyond the pale of necessity. Right? On the other side of the argument, there's a message being sent out, but there's also a sentencing guideline, and I don't know what the menu says. I don't know whether they could have given him a year. I don't know whether they could have given him 2 months. I only know what they think they have to give him based upon the guidelines, and they obviously think they have to give him a certain amount of time. Now, whether he appeals it, whether the written reasons that will come out to his football club and no doubt his lawyer Nick DeMarco, that they can look at, because it's one thing being handed down by the proverbial beak, the sentence, it's another thing having the reasons put in writing, and then you start to look at those reasons and see if you can appeal against them. So we don't know yet if there's going to be any form of appeal. But with all due respect to Ivan, there are other victims in this equation, like Brentford, that have done very little wrong, that now have a player. In fact, they've done nothing wrong. That now have a player that's probably costing them £60,000-70,000 a week on a contract at a key time in both his development and his opportunities, because there's only a certain amount of time he's got left on his contract. And Brentford have got a decision to make whether they are legally obliged, morally obliged, to continue paying his contract during this 8-month period.
Would you pay him?
It's a discussion I would have with the player, because I would say to him, listen, I'm pretty sure that I have an ability to not pay you for this because you've brought the club into disrepute. You're not available to do the job. And so subsequently, that surely shouldn't mean I have to pay you. But here's the flip side of that argument. Then you have a player that doesn't feel the way he should perhaps towards the club, even though he's the person that's created the temperature. So I would be saying to Ivan, am I going to be paying you for you to come back in January to want to get a big move out the door because some of the big 6 clubs will be interested in you? Or am I going to be paying you because you and I are going to talk about a new contract that actually protects my position with you? So I'd be having a grown-up conversation with you, because you also have to remember, and I am in the camp of don't tell me what you've done for me previously, tell me what you're going to do for me next. But Ivan Toney and his contribution to that football club in terms of his performances have put them in part where they are.
Oh, sure, even with this hanging over him.
Yeah, even with this hanging over him. Now,
Yeah.
when you read out the rule book, we don't need that, Jim, because you'd have to be living under a rock to not know that you're not allowed to bet. I mean, he can see Kieran Trippier. He can see all the furore and the media attention around the circumstances that happened to him, different set of circumstances, and perhaps not the same profligacy or prolific nature of the offences in terms of how many offences that Ivan Toney has committed. So there's no ignorance is not an excuse.
Well, you must have known all about Joey Barton.
And he will have known all about it.
18 months sanction for more than 1,000 breaches of Rule E8, the one I've just read out.
Like a lot of young men in life, they don't think certain rules apply to them. He will now think that, and he's a decent lad, comes from a decent background, decent father, and they'll know that this is something that they shouldn't have done, and it's silly, and they'll regret it for some time. And he's hurt himself. He's hurt his football club, and the biggest victim of it will ultimately probably be Brentford. He'll be a victim of it, but they'll be a victim of his actions. He's a victim of his own actions. Brentford, by association, are a victim of his actions because they now lose, arguably their best player, for a significant period of time, probably over half the season, which could have knock-on effects. And if football follows true to form, and I hope it doesn't, the irony of it is the player comes back and then suddenly decides he wants to leave. And then Brentford get the benefit of bleeding nothing, besides perhaps be able to demand a good transfer fee, even though the boy's reputation will be slightly diminished.
But what of the fact that 3 of the 8 months are in the close season?
Well,
he's not bothered by that.
Well, look, the problem is, Jim, you can't...
That's like, here's an 8-month ban, but we're waiving 3 of the 8.
No, well, look... They hand down a sentence, right? And if their sentencing guidelines, for want of an expression, right, is they give you a certain amount of time. And it's taken this amount of time to get him into a situation where the process has been followed. We've got arguments happening about Manchester City. We've got arguments happening about Everton. And the pushback will be due process. Right? If we believe there's some sinister conspiracy that was cobbled together with Brentford to do a little deal behind the doors of saying, don't do anything until we finish the season, that's silly. That's not likely to have happened. The bottom line is when you go in front of a judge, you don't get sentenced and then your sentence starts 3 months later, do you? You get sentenced on the day that the adjudication has been handed down. So if they say it's an 8-month ban, if the statute book or whatever it is that they sentence based upon says we give you 8 months, and that 8 months happens to be 2 or 3 months in the closed season, then that's just the nature of the beast.
Is it?
Well, it is, isn't it? I mean, if the guidelines say...
What are the optics of it?
Actually, well, I don't care what the optics of it are, because I'm tired of this idea that we should look at everything through a certain prism, because ultimately you look at it in the way that you choose to look at it, not the way that other people think you should look at it. If the guidelines are, the moment you breach a rule, you get 8-month ban. When you are adjudicated to have breached the rules, right? So if they get him into court, into the tribunal now, and they've gone all through the process and collecting the evidence and the legal representation has done everything they need to do, and they get in front of them in May, then if 8 months or 7 months or 6 months or 4 months or whatever it was in their sentencing guidelines, then that's what they've done. And we can pull together these conspiracy theories about, well, 3 months of it don't count. 5 months of it do. The purpose of this is to consequence the player for breaching rules. Whatever you do, in some people's minds, it'll never be enough. If we gave him 3 months, and if they'd given him 5 months from the beginning of the season, someone should have said it would have been 6. I'm comfortable, insofar as I'm comfortable with anybody being banned from football because of the reality of the circumstances surrounding it, that he has got the prerequisite punishments.
That this is the appropriate punishment.
Well, I can't imagine why it wouldn't be, because it's a high-profile situation. You've got a very highfalutin lawyer in your corner. The FA and the Premier League will have had to make their cross the I's and dotted the T's, or the other way round, to have gotten themselves in a position where they're sanctioning him, and he's got what he's got.
You see, so many people are getting in touch now. Fans, I've got one in the past. It's a former top footballer. I'm not going to name him. I've no need to name him. I'm listening to you guys. Betting's fine. It's his choice. He's been banned for betting on football, which all players know is against the rules.
No debate.
It's there to stop insider trading and stop potential fixing of bets. It's in place to protect the integrity of football. A million other sports you could have bet on, but you bet in football. And there's a really good point from Patch, who's a Villa fan. Guys, I'm listening to you. Tony being banned now potentially skews the final league standings and the league winners and European qualifiers. Why not a ban from the end of this season or the start of next?
Because the process, I mean, there's a debate to be had, but every set of rules that you have can always be finessed when a circumstance comes out that actually sort of circumvents them to some extent in people's minds. There is a statute, there is a sentencing guideline, there are rules. You're not found guilty. You are innocent until proven guilty. They brought charges against him. He's gone in. He's had his day in court, metaphorically, and he's been charged, and he's been now found guilty of the offences.
But wait a minute. Following up on what Patch is saying there, and I've just thought of something. Say the title race was still alive.
Well, you could make that argument about
Brentford
City.
have got Manchester City in the final day of the season, which they haven't, but say they had.
Yeah.
Oh, they have. They have.
Well, the title's done.
So, yeah, but say it wasn't.
Yeah, okay. Or say my aunt was my uncle. But we can make this
excuse the outcome.
We can make the argument about Manchester City, the charges that they're facing. We can make the argument about the charges that Everton are facing.
But they play Tottenham next. That could affect the European places.
It's an imperfect world. Somebody gets charged with something. You don't race to the bottom and say, I've charged you with that, you're now guilty. That's not how it works. If somebody charges with you something, you have the right to defend yourself. And that means there has to be a process followed.
But this isn't a perfect process, is it?
No, but there is never going to be a perfect process, because you cannot just charge somebody with something unless they're going to fall over instantaneously and hold their hands up and say, I'm guilty of everything. I'm happy for you to throw the book at me on the day you said, you tell me I'm guilty, I'm guilty. Yeah. Most people are going to say, oh, well, I want my day in court to be able to either mitigate or explain or have some element of, finding some vindication on whatever argument I'm putting forward. So there has to be a process. So unfortunately, the deeds of football teams are determined by the individuals in those sides, and other sides are just opponents in the way.
There are a variety of questions coming out of this. We'll carry this on after the break. Brentford fans getting in touch. Here's one, Adam. Simon, thanks for your comments on the length of the ban, particularly about the part of it being served in the summer. He deserves a ban, but thanks for getting it out there that there is not any conspiracy with Brentford or a regulator. Thank you for that. Another aspect of this comes out, I would suggest, with the statement. I don't know who's advising Tony, but he comes out with, I'm naturally disappointed that I'll be unable to play for the next 8 months. The written reasons for the Commission's decision have not yet been published. So I make no further comment at this point other than to thank my family, friends, Brentford and our fans for their support through what's been a very difficult time. And I focus on returning to play the game I love next season. No apology.
To whom? Who's it? Okay.
Was there contrition in that?
To whom?
What do you mean, to whom?
No,
how about his club and the fans?
Well, perhaps he has done that.
I'd like to apologise to my employer.
Perhaps he's done that
but
privately.
Should he not do that publicly?
Or not necessarily, because the person that he has consequence most is himself. As a result of that, Brentford are in the cart as well. So there was an element of contrition that perhaps may need to be required to his football club. I'm not entirely sure he needs to be contrite to anybody else.
And one other unanswered question, but we'll try and get an answer to it. Can he be sold in the next window?
Well, I don't see why not.
At the end of August.
Can't be played. He's got a contract.
Jim White and Simon Jordan. Monday to Friday mornings from 10 on AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.